our group in the pediatric section has talked a lot about this issue, about whether to be doing these taps or not. A couple of things to point out. First of all, the protection from strep pneumo and H flu B vaccines doesn't start to kick in until about 2 to 4 weeks after the vaccine is given. When is the vaccine given? At 2 months. So from my standpoint, we're not really getting significant protection against strep pneumo and H flu B until about 2.5 to 3 months. The rate of meningitis, Larry Mellick has sent out a lot of emails about this, that meningitis is not real common. It's out there, but it's not real common, and he's right. If you look at kids outside the neonatal period, from 1 month to 5 years in the United States, and that's about 4 million kids per birth cohort, so it's about 20 million kids, there's about 1,000 cases of meningitis per year in that age group. Total, nationwide, 1,000 cases. Now, we're not talking about kids that get in car accidents and have inoculation, direct inoculation. We're talking about just kind of arising out of background. So it's a relatively rare disease. And because it's a relatively rare disease, a lot of folks are kind of sitting back and thinking, well, it's not that important anymore. We can relax now. I am uneasy about that approach because there are still 1,000 cases out there. And one of the tenets when I was in my residency, and I still think it is pertinent today, if you think about doing a spinal tap on a child, if you think it might be helpful to do that, if you think it might be important to do that, you should do it. If you think about it, you should do it. If there's some debate in your mind, do I need to tap? I'm not sure I need to. Do the tap. In my opinion, doing a tap is easier than drawing blood on a 2-month-old baby. And I think those of us who have been doing this for any period of time would recognize that that's probably true for most of us. It's not because I'm some Superman at doing taps. It's that taps in small infants generally aren't that big a deal because you've got great landmarks. Unless you got a real pudge monster, you've got great landmarks there. You got all the vertebral bodies. You can see where you're going. It's not very deep. You're only going about 4 to 5 centimeters to get into the CSF. It's not a hard thing to do. So from my standpoint, it makes more sense to do more taps than less taps. More meaning, if you're thinking about it, do it. In our group, there are some folks who have abandoned doing taps unless they're truly, and by the way, one caveat here. If you got a sick-looking baby, all bets are off. Forget about statistics. If you got a sick-looking baby, of course that baby needs a tap. What we're talking about here is a baby that doesn't look that sick. Baby's got a fever, maybe he doesn't have a source, maybe he does have a source, but especially baby without a source, that's where you should be thinking about doing this. But if you got a kid who is tachypnic, who is mottled, who is lethargic, who has a weak cry, who has very poor skin turgor, has very poor capillary refill, has very poor muscle tone, is not feeding well, has missed the last 2 or 3 feeds, that's not a kid where you're debating over whether to do the tap or not. That kid needs a tap. We're talking about kids that have a fever and otherwise look fine. That's where this debate lies, not over the toxic-looking kids. So in those kids that are not toxic-looking, it seems to me that it makes sense to be concerned about meningitis for about the first 2 to 3 months of life. I stopped doing them regularly at about 2 to 2.5 months. Some of my partners stopped doing them regularly at about 6 weeks. It's purely a matter of style. There's no way I can give you stats that says that this is the best way to do it or that some other way is the best way to do it. This is a matter of personal style, but it's based on what you know in the literature. Is 1,000 cases between 1 month and 5 years enough to do taps in kids? Of course it is. Is it small enough that we should stop doing them across the board? Of course it's not. We still have to be worried about meningitis. Yeah.
So my personal style, just to interject before that question, is under 1 month, universal. I don't care what you got. Correct. You got a runny nose, I don't care. You're febrile and you're a little monster that can't be trusted. All right, universally. Between the second month of life, between 4 and 8 weeks, I almost always tap under 6 weeks. In the 7 and 8 week old area. Like if you have a compelling story of URI or something like that, you got a great bronchiolitis history,
Exactly.
maybe there's an established virus or something like that, then I don't always tap, but I have a low threshold. As Jim points out, I don't care how old you are. You could be 15 months old. If you look toxic, you're getting a tap if I don't have a compelling story as to why not. So all toxic ones. In the third month of life, between 8 and 12 weeks, most of the studies that establish that, like our practice styles, where we're slowly tiptoed back of how old you got to be, and a lot of these studies were before all the current vaccines, as Jim pointed out. I still talk to the family about it. I think that you need to have in the chart that you spoke with the family and said that we could do an LP on this kid. I'm leaning away from it clinically. Here's why. But I think that's an important part of your chart, because someone could easily get on the stand and say, hey, look at these, Rochester, Philadelphia, blah, blah, blah criteria. Looks like this kid would have gotten a tap in that study. And it's like, well, yeah, but, and you can laboriously describe how the vaccines and whatnot have changed the picture, and I think you've got great data. But I think that you still need to say, like, look, I spoke with the family. I said we could do an LP on your kid. Here's why I'm not doing it, X, Y, and Z. Here's what our plan was. And I think that those words have to be said.
I had two comments. Number one is on the charting. Do not chart in a way that makes it look like the patient made the decision. Spinal tap offered to patient declined. Could do nothing about it. That looks terrible in court. Pros and cons of spinal tap explained to patient, and I decided it wouldn't be appropriate. Patient agreed is fine. And so I've seen cases where, well, the last one I just had, Tamiflu offered to patient declined, and the guy got sued for not giving Tamiflu.